She took his help, saying love wasn't part of the deal, unaware he was the mafia boss. The smell of stale coffee and industrial bleach was the scent of Lana's life. At 25, she felt the exhaustion of a woman twice her age seep into her bones, a damp cold that matched the relentless November rain outside Ruby's diner. It was just past 2 in the morning. She'd wiped the last counter, stacked the last rack of clean mugs, and pulled her thin jacket tight around her waitress uniform. The diner was empty. A bright, lonely box of linoleum and chrome cast against the dark, wet street. She pushed through the heavy glass door, the jingle of its bell sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. The alley was a shortcut. She knew she should not take it, not this late, but the thought of walking the extra 3 blocks in the downpour to the bus stop was more than her aching feet could handle. She hurried, her cheap, worn-out sneakers slipping on the slick pavement. The only light came from a flickering yellow bulb over the diner's back door, casting long, monstrous shadows. That was when she heard it. Not a scream, not a shout, just a wet, heavy sound, like a side of beef hitting a butcher's block. Then a man's voice, low and calm. "Check his pockets." Lana froze, pressing herself into a recess in the brick wall, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She smelled the ozone of the rain and something else, something metallic and wrong. She peered around the rusted edge of a dumpster. 3 men. 2 were standing, dressed in dark work clothes, their faces obscured by identical, blank white masks that seemed to glow in the gloom. The 3rd man was on his knees, his hands bound. He was well-dressed, a silver watch glinting on his wrist as he trembled. He looked up, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it stole Lana's breath. "Please," the kneeling man whispered. "Whatever he's paying, I'll double it." The first masked man didn't answer. He simply raised his hand. He was holding a pistol, but it was long and thick, not like the ones on television. He pressed it against the kneeling man's forehead. Lana squeezed her eyes shut, but she could not block out the sound, a heavy, suppressed thump. It was nothing like a gunshot in a movie. It was quiet, solid, and utterly final. The kneeling man collapsed, boneless, into a growing puddle. Lana's stomach turned. A small, strangled sound escaped her throat. The 2 masked men stopped, their white, featureless faces turned in unison, scanning the darkness, straight toward her. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her system. She didn't scream. She just ran. She burst from the alley onto the main street, her lungs burning, her sneakers slapping the concrete. She didn't look back. She ran for 6 blocks, the rain plastering her hair to her face, until she was just another piece of human refuse in a city that had too much of it. She didn't stop until she was at a payphone outside a closed bodega. Her hands were shaking so violently she dropped the quarter twice. She dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" The voice was bored. I saw something." Her voice was a reedy whisper. "In the alley. Behind Ruby's diner, a man. They shot him. Did you see who did it? Masks. They wore white masks. Your name?" Lana looked at the rain-streaked receiver. The air suddenly felt too cold. The dispatcher's question hung in the air. A trap she had just willingly walked into. She slammed the phone back into its cradle. She had done the right thing, she told herself. She had reported a murder. But the only thing she felt was the icy certainty that she had just signed her own death warrant. 2 nights later, the fear had settled into a low, nauseating hum. She went to work. She took the bus. She locked her door. But the world had tilted. The shadows in her small, 1-room apartment seemed deeper. The creak of the building's old pipes sounded like footsteps. She came home from her shift, the key already in her hand before she reached the door. She stopped. The door was already open, just a crack. She should have run. She should have called the police, though she knew they would be useless. Instead, a cold, fatalistic anger pushed her forward. She nudged the door open with her foot. They hadn't taken anything. Her small, second-hand television was still there. The $5 bills she kept in a jar were untouched, but they had been there. The single room was destroyed, not with the frantic energy of a robbery, but with a cold, deliberate malice. Her mattress was slashed, Her few clothes were pulled from the closet and shredded. Her bag of GED textbooks was torn apart, pages scattered like confetti, and on her bathroom mirror, scrawled in her own red lipstick, was a single word: quiet. That was when the police officer's earlier words came back to her. When she'd first moved in, he'd given her a friendly warning about the neighborhood. "You see something, Miss... You keep your head down. You didn't see it." She sat on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of her life, and finally, she cried. Not for the man in the alley, but for herself. The police, when she finally called them, were dismissive. A simple breaking and entering. "You should move, miss," one of them advised, yawning. Bad neighborhood. They didn't even dust for prints. The next day at the diner, she moved in a fog. Every customer who came in, every man in a dark coat, made her flinch. Then, in the middle of the afternoon lull, he walked in. He was the antithesis of Ruby's diner. The diner was cheap, loud and greasy. He was silent, expensive, and cold. His suit was dark charcoal wool, tailored so perfectly it seemed to be a part of him. He was tall, with dark hair cut short and neat. He wasn't handsome in the way of movie stars. His face was too hard for that. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, giving him an expression of permanent, dangerous focus. He sat in her section, at a booth in the back, and just watched. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her hands trembling. "What can I get you?" He didn't look at the menu. His eyes, a shade of dark, unreadable gray, met hers. "Lana," her name from his lips wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact. "You're in danger," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the clatter of the kitchen. "The men you saw, they know who you are." Lana's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You called it in, from a payphone on Elm. They ran the security footage from the bodega across the street. They've been looking for you. The break-in was a warning." "Who are you?" she whispered, gripping the edge of the table. "My name is Dominic, and I'm offering you protection." She recoiled. "I don't need protection. I don't even know you." "Get out." He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just held her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw an absolute stillness that terrified her more than the masks. "They won't just warn you again, Lana. They will finish it. I can't pay you." A flicker of something, amusement, irritation crossed his features. "I'm not asking for money." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to stay alive." He reached into his coat and placed a small, simple black phone on the table. It was sleek, with no logos. "This calls one number. Mine. When you change your mind." He stood, placing a $20 bill on the table for a glass of water he hadn't touched. Then he was gone. Lana stared at the phone. She should have thrown it away. She should have gone to the police. But what would she say? A man in a suit threatened her with safety? She refused his offer. She went to work the next day. She swept the floors. She pretended her life wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. That night, the bus was late. She stood at the bus stop, the only person on the street, the rain starting its nightly drizzle. A dark sedan, not an official taxi, passed her. It slowed, then continued. A minute later, it passed again. This time slower, it stopped, 20 yards away. The headlights clicked off. A door opened. Lana didn't think. She fumbled in her pocket for the phone Dominic had given her. Her fingers were numb, shaking so badly she almost dropped it. There was only one button. She pressed it. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run. She just stood, frozen, as a man started to get out of the sedan. A high-pitched squeal of tires cut the night. A black Audi, gleaming and powerful, screeched to a halt, positioning itself perfectly between Lana and the dark sedan. The passenger door swung open. Dominic was at the wheel. He didn't look at her. He was watching the other car in his side view mirror. "Get in. Now." The man from the sedan froze, looked at the Audi, and quickly got back into his car. The sedan's engine roared, and it peeled away, disappearing into the night. Lana scrambled into the Audi, slamming the door. The car smelled of rich leather and something clean and male. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Dominic didn't speed away. He just pulled calmly into traffic. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by her ragged breathing. "You knew," she finally choked out, anger mixing with the terror. "You knew they were following me. I knew they were looking," he corrected, his voice never rising. "I've had a man watching you since I left the diner. I was hoping you'd call before they found you. I can't. I know." He turned a corner, heading not toward her apartment, but toward the glittering, wealthy towers of the city's downtown. "Where are you taking me?" "A safe house. You'll stay there until I can handle this." The anger, hot and sharp, was all she had left. It was her only shield. She turned to him, her voice tight. "Okay. We have rules. If I'm doing this, we have rules." He glanced at her, that faint scar by his eye catching the glow of the dashboard. "First," Lana said, her voice gaining a false strength, "this is temporary, until those men are gone. Second, no touching." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Just for a second, no feelings," she continued, the words tumbling out. I'm not getting involved with you. This is a business transaction, safety. That's it. No complications." They stopped at a red light. He turned his head and looked at her. His gaze was so intense it felt physical, as if he were cataloging every fear, every broken piece of her. A slow, humorless smile just barely touched the corner of his mouth. No touching, no feelings, no complications. He repeated the words as if tasting them. "The terms are acceptable. Lana." The safe house was a penthouse. A private elevator opened directly into a living room the size of a basketball court, walled entirely in glass. The city glittered below them like a carpet of diamonds. The furniture was all dark wood, chrome, and white leather. It was the most beautiful and coldest place she had ever seen. "This is a safe house?" she whispered, feeling small and dirty in her damp uniform. "No one knows I own it," Dominic said, walking to a panel on the wall. "The elevator won't open for anyone else. You're a ghost here." He gestured to a hallway. "Your room is down there. There's a bathroom. Clothes in the closet. They should fit." She was overwhelmed. She was a stray cat brought into a palace, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she didn't belong. She was wary of every polished surface, every silent, expensive object. She didn't sleep in the guest room. She couldn't. She spent the hours huddled on the white leather sofa, watching the endless, indifferent lights of the city. Hours later, long after the city had gone quiet, he emerged from another hallway. He was no longer in the suit. He wore a simple black Henley and dark pants. The casual clothes did nothing to soften him. He seemed more dangerous, more coiled. He was carrying a tray. He set it on the low glass table in front of her, a bowl of thick tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. Perfectly golden. Simple. Warm food? He sat in the chair opposite her, not too close, but not far. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Finally, she picked up the sandwich. She was starving. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "You needed to eat." "No." She set the sandwich down. "Why me? Why do all this? You don't know me." Dominic watched her, his gray eyes unblinking. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "You remind me of someone," he said at last, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Someone you helped?" His gaze dropped to his hands. They were large, strong, his knuckles scarred. "Someone I couldn't—" The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. The attraction was there, a low, dangerous hum under her skin. She hated it. She hated him for making her feel it, and hated herself for not being able to stop it. She ate the soup. He just watched. Later. She finally drifted into an uneasy sleep in the guest room, the sheets softer than anything she had ever felt. But sleep offered no escape. She was back in the alley, the white masks, the man on his knees, the sound of the suppressed shot. But this time, when the men turned, their masks were gone, and she recognized one of their faces. It was the man from the sedan. He was raising his gun, not at the kneeling man, but at her. Lana woke up with a raw, silent scream lodged in her throat. The room was dark, suffocating. She was drenched in sweat. She needed air. She found the door to the balcony, her hands fumbling with the heavy glass. The wind, high above the city, was cold and sharp. It whipped her hair across her face and cut through her thin pajamas. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. It wasn't just from the cold, it was the nightmare. It was the realization that she was a prisoner, locked in a glass cage by a man she didn't know. She heard a sound, the slide of the glass door. He was there. He moved with a predator's silence. She flinched, turning. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to... The dream." He said nothing. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, sending a jolt of unwelcome heat through her. He picked up a thick cashmere blanket from a lounge chair and, from behind her, gently draped it over her shoulders, his hands. She felt the calloused skin of his fingertips as they brushed the bare skin of her neck. It was an accident, a simple consequence of the action, but it felt like a brand. It lasted only a second, a fleeting spark of contact that directly violated her first rule. He stepped away immediately, his hands back at his sides. He stood beside her, 2 feet of empty space between them, and stared out at the city. "The air helps," he said, his voice a low murmur against the wind, "but the cold will make it worse." She clutched the blanket. It was impossibly soft and warm, and it smelled like him, like clean wool and something metallic. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. "There's nowhere else for you to be," he replied, not as a threat, but as a simple, unalterable fact. He didn't try to comfort her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, a silent, powerful guardian in the dark, sharing the cold, high-altitude loneliness, and for the first time in 3 days, though she was standing next to the most dangerous man she had ever met. Lana felt a strange, terrifying flicker of safety. The penthouse was a prison of glass and silence. Lana had been there for 3 days, and the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a restless, simmering anger. She was safe, yes, but she was also a captive, a ghost, as Dominic had called her. "I'm not a prisoner," she stated one morning, finding him in the minimalist kitchen. He was drinking black coffee, already dressed in one of his immaculate dark suits. "You are not a prisoner," he agreed, his voice a low, neutral rumble. "You are protected. Protection doesn't mean I stop living." She held her chipped diner mug, a piece of her old life she'd salvaged, and it felt like a pathetic weapon. "I have to go to work. I have my GED class." She swallowed, her pride stinging. "It's my last one. The graduation ceremony is in 2 days. He was silent for a moment, studying her. His gray eyes were impossible to read. "You go to work. You go to class. You expose yourself. They will find you. So I just stay here? Forever? Until you handle this?" She shot back, her voice rising. "I can't. I won't. I'd rather take my chances." He set his cup down, the ceramic making a sharp, final sound on the quartz countertop. "You don't know the chances you would be taking." He walked to the wall of windows, looking down at the city 20 stories below. "Fine. You will continue your life. But you will do it my way." His way meant she was no longer Lana, the waitress who took the bus. She was a package, delivered and collected by a man named Sal, who had the same silent, watchful quality as Dominic. Sal drove a black Mercedes that was entirely too clean. He would sit in the diner parking lot for her entire shift. He would wait outside her community college class. Lana hated it. She hated the control. She hated the curious, pitying looks from her coworkers as she was dropped off at Ruby's like a debutante. But she also knew it was necessary. The memory of the sedan's headlights clicking off, of the door opening, was seared into her mind. She needed the safety, and she resented him for it with every fiber of her being. While Lana was struggling to maintain a shred of her old identity, Dominic was reinforcing his. He sat in the back room of a private, reservations-only restaurant in the old Italian district. The restaurant was closed. His 3 most trusted lieutenants sat across from him. These were not men in cheap suits. They were men who ran the city's shipping, its unions, its quiet, underground rivers of money. "She's a liability, Dominic," said Rico, the oldest, A man with silver hair and hands that had seen a lifetime of work. A civilian witness. You broke every rule bringing her in. She saw the Furia hit. She's a loose end. Another lieutenant, Vinny, added, his voice sharp. They'll be hunting her, and when they find her, they find us. Dominic leaned forward, his hands flat on the dark wood table. The room, which had been buzzing with worried energy, went absolutely still. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. She's not a loose end, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a temperature just above freezing. He looked at Vinny, and the younger man visibly paled. She's not a liability. She's under my protection. She is mine. We will use this. The Furia are sloppy. They left a witness. We will find the men she saw, and we will remind them why they do not operate in our territory. The subject of the girl is closed. He stared them down, one by one. No one met his gaze for more than a second. He had silenced them, not with reason, but with absolute, unquestioned authority. He was the head of the Castellan syndicate, and he had just declared a waitress untouchable. Lana, meanwhile, was growing more suspicious. The penthouse, in its silent luxury, gave her too much time to think. She had her own room, her own bathroom, and a closet full of clothes she was afraid to touch. But she was alone. Dominic was gone for hours, sometimes entire days, disappearing behind the whisper-quiet slide of the private elevator. One afternoon, she heard his voice from the study. The door was cracked open. She knew she should not, but she crept closer. The payment must be made, he was saying, his voice hard. I don't care about his excuses. Loyalty is earned, but it's paid for in blood. Make the problem disappear. I want it handled by morning. Lana recoiled, backing away so fast she bumped into a hall table. A heavy vase rattled. The voice from the study stopped. She fled to her room, her heart hammering. Payment, loyalty, blood, make the problem disappear. These were not the words of a simple, wealthy protector. These were the words of a man who dealt in violence as casually as he drank his morning coffee. The doubts, which had been small, creeping vines, now felt like they were choking her. Who was he? What kind of man had she chained herself to? The night of her GED graduation party arrived. It was not a grand affair. It was a potluck in the gymnasium of the local high school, a small, folding card table and streamer celebration for 20 other adults who were trying to get a second chance. It was the single most important night of her life. She looked at the clothes in the guest closet. They were all expensive, all in shades of gray, black, or beige, but in the back, she found a simple, sleeveless dress of deep navy blue. It was modest, made of a soft wool that felt impossibly kind against her skin. She had never worn anything so beautiful. She pulled her hair back, applied a little of the makeup she'd found, and looked at herself. She didn't see the terrified waitress from the alley. She saw someone else, someone solid. She walked into the living room, expecting to find Sal waiting by the elevator. Instead, Dominic was there, standing by the window. He was in a dark suit, but he was also wearing a black overcoat, as if he were preparing to go out. He turned as she approached, and he looked. It was not the cold, assessing stare she was used to. His gaze lingered, traveling from her face down to the hem of the dress and back up again. It was the first time he had ever looked at her like a man looking at a woman. The scar over his eye seemed to soften. Sal's waiting downstairs, she said, her voice a little breathless. No, he's not, Dominic replied. I'll be taking you. Lana was stunned. To a high school gym? For a potluck? I thought I was supposed to be hiding. You are, he said, grabbing his keys from the bowl by the door. And I'm the only one I trust to hide you. The drive was silent, but it was a different silence. It was charged, unsettled. When they walked into the brightly lit, cavernous gymnasium, the sudden clash of worlds was almost comical. The room smelled of lukewarm chili and cheap sheet cake. A tinny speaker was playing old pop songs, and into this walked Lana, dressed in designer wool, escorted by a man who looked like he owned the entire city. He was a wolf in a high school gym. He stuck out, his dark suit a stark contrast to the jeans and polo shirts of the other graduates and their families. He said nothing, simply stood against the bleachers, his arms crossed, watching. He was her bodyguard, her captor, and her date, all in one. After she received her certificate, a simple piece of paper in a cardboard folder, a slow song began to play. Something old, a gentle blues tune. Her classmates grabbed their spouses, their kids. Lana stood alone by the punch bowl, feeling the familiar sting of isolation. She turned, and he was there. He had moved from the bleachers without making a sound. He did not ask. He did not smile. He simply held out his hand. She looked at his hand, at the scarred knuckles, at the sheer, improbable ridiculousness of the situation. She was terrified of this man, but she was also in this one small, brightly lit room, more alone than she had ever been. She put her hand in his. He pulled her to the middle of the floor, one hand settling firmly on the small of her back. The contact was a shock, a violation of her no-touching rule that she was, for this one moment, allowing. He was, to her complete surprise, a perfect dancer. He moved with a slow, confident grace, guiding her so easily she felt weightless. She was stiff at first, her body rigid, but the warmth of his hand on her back seeped through the wool, a steady, solid heat. She could smell his cologne, something clean and sharp, like juniper and iron. "You're a long way from home, Dominic," she whispered, looking at his suit jacket instead of his face. "So are you," he murmured back, his voice low in her ear. She looked up at him then. His gray eyes were focused entirely on her. He was not looking at the doors, not scanning the room. He was just looking at her. He said, his voice a dry observation, "These streamers are a significant fire hazard." A sound bubbled up in her chest, one she didn't recognize. It was a laugh, not a polite chuckle, but a real, sudden, unguarded laugh. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks, maybe months. The sound surprised her as much as it did him. A flicker of something, actual, genuine warmth, moved in his eyes. The moment was broken, the song ended, but on the drive back, the atmosphere in the Audi was lighter. The silence was no longer heavy, but comfortable. They were 3 blocks from the penthouse, stopped at a red light when the night shattered. It started with a sound like a hornet, a high-pitched whine, then a smack against the passenger side window. Lana screamed. The window did not break, but a spider web of cracks appeared. "Down." Dominic's voice was not a request. It was a roar of pure command, a sound she had never heard. He slammed his hand onto her head, shoving her down into the footwell. Simultaneously, he stomped on the accelerator. The Audi surged forward, but the attackers were ready. 2 motorcycles, black and roaring, swerved in front of them, blocking the intersection. Another 2 pulled up beside them. The men were in dark leathers, their faces hidden by tinted visors. A gunman on the back of one bike raised his pistol. Dominic didn't hesitate. He threw himself sideways, covering Lana's small, curled-up form with his entire body. It was a heavy, crushing weight. Solid muscle and bone, shielding her completely. The car filled with the sound of gunfire, a rapid, deafening pop, 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 as bullets hammered the car's armored chassis. Lana was trapped under him, her face pressed into the leather of his seat, her world reduced to the smell of him and the terrifying noise. She felt his entire body tense, a solid wall of protection. He was shouting into a small microphone on his collar, barking orders. "Intersection of 5th and Main, Furia, 2 bikes, 4 men. Light them up." He cranked the wheel, the tires screaming, and slammed the Audi directly into one of the motorcycles. There was a sickening crunch of metal and a human scream. The car jolted, but it was free. Dominic accelerated, swerving through the intersection, his speed relentless, his driving precise and brutal. Within 2 blocks, the sound of the motorcycles had faded, replaced by the distant wail of sirens. Sirens he was driving away from. He didn't slow down until they were in the private underground garage. He pulled into his spot, the engine ticking. The car was silent. "Are you hit?" His voice was ragged, terrifying in its fury. "No," she whispered from the floor. I'm okay. Stay down." He was out of the car, his own gun, a heavy black pistol. Suddenly in his hand, he scanned the garage. It was empty. He finally opened her door and pulled her out, his grip bruising. He half dragged, half carried her to the elevator, shoving her inside, his body pressed against hers, shielding her even now. The door slid open to the penthouse. He pushed her in. "Stay here. Don't move." He was breathing heavily, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. He turned to the bar, and that's when she saw it. His white shirt under his suit jacket was dark, high on his left shoulder. A patch of crimson was spreading. "You're shot," she breathed. "It's a graze. It's nothing." He poured a glass of whiskey, his hand perfectly steady. "It is not nothing." The adrenaline, the fear, and a new, fierce emotion she couldn't name made her voice sharp. She took the first aid kit from the bathroom. "Sit down, Dominic." He turned, a look of genuine surprise on his face. "Lana, sit down." To her astonishment, he did. He sat on the edge of the leather sofa. She knelt in front of him. "Take off the jacket and the shirt." He shrugged off the jacket, hissing as the fabric pulled at the wound. He unbuttoned his shirt, his eyes never leaving her face. She pulled the bloody fabric aside. The bullet had torn a groove across the packed muscle of his shoulder. It was bleeding, but it wasn't deep. She saw the scarred knuckles of his hands, and now she saw that his chest and shoulders were a map of other, older wounds, faint, silvery lines. Her hands were shaking. "This is going to sting." She poured antiseptic on a cloth and pressed it to the wound. He didn't even flinch. He just watched her, his breathing a little heavy, his eyes dark. The closeness was overwhelming. She was kneeling between his legs, her face inches from his bare chest. The room was silent except for the sound of her own ragged breath and the clink of the supplies. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She worked, her movements clumsy, her heart hammering. She cleaned the blood, applied pressure, and then, very carefully, placed a thick, sterile bandage over the wound. She finished, her hands lingering on the bandage, her fingertips brushing his hot skin. She looked up. Her face was only inches from his. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the hard line of his mouth, the way his dark pupils had completely overtaken the gray of his irises. He didn't move. He just looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw all the violence of the last hour, all the tension of the last week. He leaned in. It was slow, incredibly slow. He was giving her every chance to run, to pull away, to enforce her rule. She didn't move. His lips touched hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was brutal and desperate and hungry. It was the raw, unadvertiser, friendly punch of adrenaline, the sharp tang of blood, the deep, burning need of two people who had just stared down death. He tasted of whiskey and iron and a control that was, for the first time, completely undone. His hand came up, the one that wasn't injured, and buried itself in her hair, his fingers gripping her scalp. He didn't pull her. He anchored her. His other hand went to her waist, pulling her flush against his knees. The kiss was a violation of every rule, and it was the only thing that made sense. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his uninjured shoulder, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was trying to kill her. After a long, breathless moment, she finally pulled away, her lungs burning. She was shaking, her whole body trembling. She stared at him, her lips swollen, her mind reeling. "This," she whispered, her voice a complete wreck. "This wasn't part of the deal." Dominic's eyes were black. He didn't look sorry. He didn't look amused. He looked like a man who had finally gotten something he wanted. His voice was a low, rough rasp. "Then change the deal." That night, Lana lay awake in her soft, silent bed. She didn't sleep. She could still feel the press of his mouth, the hard weight of his body shielding hers, the possessive grip of his hand in her hair. She had come to this man seeking safety from monsters, only to find that he was the most dangerous and most compelling monster of all. She was terrified. And for the first time in her life, she was terrified not of what he would do to her, but of how badly she wanted to let him. The kiss had broken the deal, and its ghost lingered in the air between them for days. The penthouse, once a silent, cold prison, was now charged with a new, unspoken tension. Lana's rules. No touching, no feelings, no complications, had been shattered by a moment of gunfire and desperation, and she did not know how to rebuild them. Dominic changed. The attack had pulled a trigger in him, and the man who had been a remote, cold protector now became a constant, suffocating presence. He did not leave the penthouse. His lieutenants, men with hard faces and expensive suits, now came to him, ushered into his study for quiet, brief meetings that Lana was never meant to overhear. Sal, the driver, was gone, replaced by Dominic himself. He did not drive her to work. He informed her she was no longer working at the diner. "You cannot go back there," he stated, his voice flat, as he poured them both coffee 2 mornings after the ambush. "You cannot tell me that!" Lana's voice was sharp, laced with panic. The diner was her last connection to a life that was hers. "That job is all I have." "No, it's not," he said, his eyes on her, intense and possessive. "You have this. You have me. That job was a liability. You're done there." He had arranged for her GED certificate to be mailed. He had bought her a new laptop so she could, as he put it, find a new interest. He became more involved in her daily life in a way that was both terrifyingly domestic and utterly controlling. He would ask her what she wanted to eat and then have a chef-prepared meal delivered that could have fed a family of 6. He sat in the living room, reading financial reports, while she tried to read her novels, the silence between them thick with the memory of his lips. She resisted. She pushed back with all the strength she had. She was a runaway, a survivor. She had spent her entire life escaping the control of men, and now she found herself in the most beautiful, inescapable cage of all. She pushed him away emotionally, building a wall of sarcastic, clipped responses, but the physical heat was a different, traitorous entity. She was intensely aware of him. When he walked past her, the air shifted. When his hand brushed hers as he passed her a cup, her skin burned. She would watch him as he stood by the window, his shoulders broad under a simple shirt, the lines of his body taut and powerful. He was a predator, and she was trapped in his den, and her stupid, lonely body did not seem to understand the danger. One afternoon, she was trying to focus on a history text, one of the few books she'd salvaged. She was reading about feudal lords and a serf's obligation. The words absolute control and no recourse swam in front of her eyes. Suddenly, she was not in the penthouse. She was 13 years old, back in a trailer in a state she could not even name. She was small, too thin, and her stepfather was standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit. He smelled of stale beer and jealousy. "You live under my roof. You eat my food." His voice, a gravelly, self-pitying whine, echoed in her head. "That makes you mine. You don't walk. You don't talk. You don't even breathe, unless I say so." She remembered the feeling of absolute, paralyzing helplessness, the knowledge that no one would help her, that her only value was in her obedience. Lana gasped, slamming the book shut. The penthouse windows, the glittering city rushed back into focus. She was breathing hard, a cold sweat on her neck. "He's just the same," she whispered to the empty room, her voice shaking. "Just a different kind of cage." She was trembling, the memory so vivid. When Dominic emerged from the study, he saw her, and his face, usually a mask of cold composure, tightened. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "What is it? What's wrong?" He reached for her. "Don't!" she yelled, scrambling back, her hands up. "Don't touch me!" He froze, his hand in the air. The rejection was a physical blow in the silent room. He looked at her genuine, animal terror, and his expression changed. The anger and the possession faded, replaced by something she could not read. "Get your coat, Lana." His voice was quiet, but it was not a request. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." He walked to the closet and pulled out her jacket. He didn't throw it at her. He held it out. "I'm not your stepfather. I'm not him. You want to be suffocated by your past. You can stay here and do it, or you can come with me and breathe." The words hit her harder than a slap. He had seen it. He had seen her fear and, in one cold, precise sentence, diagnosed it. She snatched the jacket from his hand and followed him to a small, private elevator she had never seen before. It required a separate key, one he produced from his wallet. The car ascended, and then the doors opened. Not to a hallway, but to the sky. They were on the roof, but it was not a roof. It was a garden, a secret, impossible oasis of green in a world of steel and glass. There were stone pathways, mature trees with dark green leaves, and beds of hardy winter flowers. It was surrounded by high glass walls that blocked the wind but not the view, and the entire city's skyline wrapped around them like a distant, glittering promise. This is impossible, Lana breathed, walking onto the mossy stones. The air was cold, but it was fresh. Real air. "This was my brother's," Dominic said, his voice quiet. He walked to a simple stone bench, his hands in his pockets. He was the architect. I was the businessman. Lana stood, clutching her jacket. She had never heard this tone from him. It was raw, unguarded. "He built this place to escape," Dominic continued, not looking at her, but at the skyline. "He loved beautiful things, things that didn't serve a purpose. He thought they were a strength. I told him they were a weakness." "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic's jaw tightened. The scar over his eye seemed to pull at his skin. "He died. He inherited the syndicate before I did. He was too soft for it. He thought he could run our world and still have a place like this. He trusted the wrong people. He brought them here." He turned to look at her, and his gray eyes were filled with a bleak, ancient cold. "He trusted a man as a brother, and that man put a bullet in his head. Right here." He motioned to the stones a few feet away. "He bled out in his garden. Trust nearly killed me, too. When I took over, I learned the lesson he died for. Trust doesn't exist. It's just a weakness you haven't paid for yet." He was not just a protector. He was a man who had inherited a war he did not start, but was determined to win. He was as much a prisoner of his life as she was of his. Lana looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw the man, not the monster, the man who was shaped by loss, who had hardened himself against betrayal, who saw the entire world as a threat to be managed. She walked toward him, slowly, her anger, her fear. It all dissolved into a quiet, profound ache. She stood in front of him, so close she could see the flecks of black in his gray eyes. Hesitantly, her hand shaking, she lifted her fingers. She did not touch his lips or his cheek. She touched the old, silvery scar that cut through his eyebrow, a mark of the violence that had made him. He did not flinch. He did not move. He just closed his eyes, a small, sharp intake of breath, the only sign of his reaction. It was the most profound surrender she had ever witnessed. The no-touching rule was a distant memory. This was not a rule. This was a choice. He slowly opened his eyes. He captured her hand, not in a grip, but gently, his fingers enclosing hers. He turned his head and pressed a slow, warm kiss into the center of her palm. He held it there, his lips moving against her skin, his eyes locked on hers. "I broke my rules for you, Lana," he whispered against her hand. "I let you see this place. No one comes here." "Why?" "Because I had to," he said, his voice a rough rasp. "I had to know if you were a ghost or if you were real." He stood, pulling her with him. He was taller than she realized, a solid, warm presence in the cold air. He didn't kiss her mouth. Not yet. He bent his head, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, just below her ear. A shiver went through her, deep and electric. His other hand came up, tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was calloused, but surprisingly gentle. He was learning her face, mapping her, as if by touch alone. "You're real," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. He claimed her mouth then. It was nothing like the first kiss, that desperate, angry collision. This was slow. This was deliberate. This was a discovery. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of two broken people finding a single, solid point in a spinning world. It was a question, and her soft, yielding response was the answer. It was a slow, wordless intimacy. His hands slid from her waist, one moving up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, the other settling on the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the hard, steady beat of his heart through his suit, a counterpoint to the wild fluttering in her own chest. Bodies speak what words cannot. His touch spoke of possession, but also of a strange, rough-edged tenderness. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, moved, sliding up his chest, her fingers curling into the lapels of his coat. Holding on, he lifted her, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to a sheltered alcove, a wide stone bench piled with thick, weatherproof cushions. He sat, pulling her onto his lap, never breaking the kiss. The city lights were beginning to emerge, a billion pinpricks of light in the deepening twilight, but they were in their own world, surrounded by the dark, sleeping trees and the cold, clean air. He pulled away, but only to look at her. He rested his forehead against hers. They just breathed. It was an intimacy more profound than any she had ever known. A shared silence, a fragile peace. That peace lasted for one perfect day. Lana woke up in his bed. She had no memory of walking there. He was gone. But the imprint of his body was still warm beside her. She felt, for the first time in her life, not just safe, but cherished. She padded out into the living room, wearing his black shirt. The apartment was quiet. He was in the study, she assumed. She made coffee, humming. She felt light, a stranger to herself. She decided to tidy up, a small, domestic impulse. She collected his coffee cup from the study, her coffee cup from the living room. She went back to the study to return a book he'd left out. It was a heavy, leather-bound volume on architecture. As she slid it back onto the shelf, it bumped a wooden panel. There was a faint, oiled click. The entire section of the bookshelf hissed open, revealing not a wall, but a room. Lana's blood went cold. The scent of gun oil and ozone hit her. It was not a study, it was a war room. One wall was covered in detailed surveillance photos of men she did not know, their faces circled in red. Another wall held a map of the city, marked with territories. And one wall, the one that made her stomach drop, was an arsenal. Handguns, rifles, and weapons she did not recognize were mounted on black pegboard. On a central desk, files were stacked. She walked in, as if in a trance. The first file she touched was labeled La Furia. She opened it. Inside were the photos of the men who had ambushed them. She stumbled back, knocking over another file. Its contents spilled onto the floor. It was a dossier. On her. Photos of her at the diner. Photos of her at the bus stop. A detailed report of her life, her past, her failed attempts to build a new one. Then, she saw the main file on his desk. It was a thick, black binder, and on the spine, in simple gold lettering, was the name, D. Castellan, and below it, Syndicate Operations. The words from the phone call came back. Payment, loyalty, blood, the men in the alley, the white masks, the execution. Dominic Castellan, the Castellan Syndicate. He wasn't in the life. He was the life. He was the boss. Lana, his voice. He was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of stone. He saw what she was looking at. He saw the file in her hand. He didn't move. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice a stranger's. She held up the file, the one with her face on it. "Who are you really?" He was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then, he gave her the truth. "My name is Dominic Castellan. I am the head of the Castellan Syndicate." The ground fell away. The man in the garden, the man who had held her, was a lie. This was the truth. The guns, the photos, the blood. "The men in the alley," she breathed, her mind racing. Putting the pieces together. "They were your rivals." "Yes. La Furia. So you didn't just stumble on me," she said. The betrayal a cold, acid burn in her throat. "You knew?" "You were protecting what? Your territory?" "I was protecting you." "Why?" she screamed, the file dropping from her hand. "Why me? A waitress, a witness. Why?" His face was unreadable. His voice was cold, a simple statement of fact. "I told you. You reminded me of someone I lost. Someone you couldn't save. My brother's wife." he said. She was an outsider. Innocent. She was killed by La Furia because of who we were. I saw you, and I saw her, and I broke my rule. It was the final, devastating blow. It was worse than him being a mob boss. The intimacy, the garden, the night they'd shared. It was not for her. It was never for her. She was a ghost. She was a replacement, a penance for the woman he had failed. I wasn't real, she whispered, the tears coming hot and furious. I was just your second chance. Lana, that's not what it was. He took a step toward her. Don't, she shrieked, shoving past him, out of the terrible room. She ran through the penthouse, this beautiful, horrible cage. No touching, no feelings, no complications. That was the deal. She hammered the button for the private elevator. He stood in the study doorway, a dark, powerful silhouette, watching her. Lana, do not do this, he commanded. The elevator doors slid open. She stumbled inside. She looked at him, one last time. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. I'd rather be hunted by them, she spat, her voice thick with tears and hate, than be haunted by you. The doors slid shut, sealing him away. Dominic did not move. He stood for a full minute, the silence of the penthouse deafening. He closed his eyes. The image of her face, twisted in betrayal, burned into his mind. Then, he pulled his phone from his pocket. He was not a man in a garden. He was a boss. Sal, he said, his voice void of all emotion. She's on the street. She's alone, and she's running. Do not engage. Do not be seen. Just keep her alive. Running from the penthouse was one thing. Surviving the fall was another. Lana hit the pavement with $100 in her pocket and the clothes on her back. Dominic's shirt, which she tore off in the elevator and threw in a street-side trash can, and the borrowed jeans. She was back in her own skin, and it felt thin, cold, and terribly exposed. She went back to her apartment, the one that had been violated, the one she had fled. It was the only place she had. She used her meager savings to replace the lock, a pathetic gesture against the kind of men who had stalked her. She slept with a kitchen knife on her nightstand. She tried to reclaim her life. She tried to convince herself that Dominic Castellan and his dark, suffocating world were a fever dream. She was Lana. She was a waitress. She was a survivor. She would not be a ghost for a dead woman. But the threats had not vanished. The world she had returned to was not the one she had left. The shadows seemed longer. Every man who looked at her for a second too long made her skin crawl. She was walking home from the grocery store, her arms aching from the weight of the bags, when she saw him. He was standing across the street, under a burned-out lamppost. He was not threatening. He was not in a dark sedan. He was just a man, in a simple jacket, watching. He was not one of Dominic's men. She knew Sal's face, and this was not him. This man was thinner, with a nervous energy. She ducked into a bodega, her heart hammering. She waited for 10 minutes, her hands shaking so badly she could not pick up the soda she was pretending to buy. When she came out, he was gone, but she felt his eyes everywhere. The normal life she was trying to reclaim was a lie. Dominic, in his glass tower, was living his own kind of hell. He had not slept. He had not left the study, the war room. He had watched the live feed from the camera Sal had placed across from her apartment building. He watched her buy the new lock. He watched her carry the groceries. He watched her look over her shoulder. And he watched the man under the lamppost. He rewound the footage, zoomed in. He did not recognize the man. He was not one of his. He was not Furia. He was someone else, a wild card. Rico, Dominic barked into his phone, his voice a low growl. I have a new face, a shadow on the girl. I'm sending you the file. Find him. He was a boss, not a man in a garden, and his world was closing in. He received a call from an informant, a dock worker he had on his payroll. They're watching her. Boss, the man whispered, his voice tinny over the line. La Furia. It ain't just about the hit she saw no more. It's about you. Dominic's blood went cold. Explain. They know you got her. They know you stashed her. They think she's your weakness. They're saying the new boss, the Iron Castellan, has a soft spot. They're planning to use that. Dominic hung up the phone. He had not protected her. He had made her a target. His one broken rule had painted a bullseye on her back. Lana, oblivious to this new, specific danger, walked into Ruby's diner for her morning shift. She needed the money. She needed the noise. She needed to be someone other than Dominic's broken toy, her boss. Ruby, a woman with a kind face and a spine of steel, called her into the back office. "Lana, honey, I gotta let you go." Lana stared. "What? Ruby, I'm on time. My tables are clean. Did I do something wrong?" Ruby would not meet her eyes. She was fiddling with a stack of order slips, her hands trembling. "It's not you, kid. It's slow. The economy. The economy." Lana's voice was hollow. "You're hiring? There's a sign in the window right now." Ruby finally looked up, and Lana saw the one thing she recognized above all others: fear. Ruby's eyes were swimming in it. "2 men came by this morning. Lana," she whispered, her voice cracking. They said it would be bad for business if I kept you on. Bad for my health, my windows, I got grandkids. Honey, I can't." Lana didn't need to ask who. It didn't matter if it was Dominic's men or his rivals. The result was the same. His world had poisoned hers. She walked out of the diner, not in anger, but in a dull, crushing fog. She had no job. She had no safety. She was alone. She sat on a bench at the bus stop, the same one where Dominic had rescued her. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She had run from him, from his protection, only to find that he was the air she breathed, the prison she could not escape. Alone, jobless, hunted, the cycle of her life, the one she had fought so hard to break, had come full circle. Her stepfather's words echoed in her ears. Useless. Nothing. You'll always be nothing. She broke down, not with loud, angry sobs, but with the silent, shoulder-shaking despair of the truly hopeless. She sat on a public bench and cried, and the city, in all its hurried indifference, moved on around her. Dominic received the word at the same time as Shadow. Sal reported her breakdown, his informant on the inside of the La Furia crew, a man he had paid a fortune to place, sent a single, coded text. "Meeting tonight. Pier 12. They want the shipping lanes. They're bringing the girl as the price of admission. They were not just watching her. They were planning to take her, to use her as a bargaining chip in a meeting to negotiate turf, a piece of meat to be traded for shipping containers. And if the negotiation went badly, she would be the first casualty." He was in the Audi, his gun in its holster, his mind a cold, sharp blade in under 2 minutes. Lana had finally, numbly made her way home. She was fumbling with the new, cheap lock when she heard the elevator in her hall ding. She froze. He stepped out, and her entire world stopped. He was not the man from the garden, and he was not the man in the suit. This was someone else. He was a storm, pure and simple. He wore no jacket, just a black Henley that did nothing to hide the weapon holstered at his side. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He walked down the hall, his boots silent on the carpet, and stopped 5 feet from her. "Lana," he said. His voice a low, rough command. She recoiled, her back hitting the door. "No, get away from me. You are not allowed here. You've done enough. They're coming for you, Lana, La Furia. Not to warn you, to take you. They're planning to use you tonight." "So what?" she spat, the tears of her breakdown turning to hot, angry acid. "So you can use me instead, as a replacement for your ghost. No, I'm done being used by anyone. I will take my chances." He took a step closer, his hands held up, palms out. It was a gesture of peace from a man who had none in him. "I broke my rule for you, Lana. I did it because I was a fool, haunted by the past, but I am here now, breaking every other rule I have for you, not for her. For you, let me protect you." "I don't want your protection!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the narrow, dim hallway. "I want my life, the one you took from me, the one you destroyed. You come near me, and I swear, I'll—" The sound of splintering wood cut her off. It was not her door. It was the stairwell door, 1 floor below, being kicked in. Heavy footsteps, more than one person, were hammering up the stairs. Dominic didn't look. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed her. He didn't pull her. He didn't ask. He wrapped one arm around her waist, clamped his other hand over her mouth to stifle her scream, and threw his entire body weight, and hers, backwards, smashing through the flimsy particle board of her apartment door. They landed in a heap, a tangle of limbs, on her cheap rug. She was fighting him, biting his hand, kicking, but he just grunted, rolling, and pulled her behind him as he got to one knee. His gun was in his hand. The hallway outside exploded with noise. "She's in there! Get in!" A man in a white mask, the same mask from the alley, a blank, terrifying face, filled the doorway. He raised his pistol. Lana screamed. Before he could fire, too sharp. Suppressed thumps sounded from the hallway. The masked man looked surprised, his hand going to his chest. He collapsed forward. Behind him stood Sal and two other men in dark, tactical-looking gear. They were Dominic's men. They had been in the elevator. They had been waiting. Dominic stood, pulling Lana up with him. He didn't say a word. He just holstered his gun, grabbed her by the arm, and dragged her out of the apartment, past the body of the dead gunman, and into the elevator. The ride down was silent. Lana was shaking, her mind a white void of static and terror. The ride back to the penthouse was the same. She was huddled against the passenger door, as far from him as she could get. He just drove, his jaw set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The elevator doors opened to the safe house. The silence was absolute. Lana stood in the middle of the enormous, beautiful room, her entire body vibrating with adrenaline and fear. He closed the door. The heavy, oiled click sounding like a cell door locking. She turned on him. "Is this it?" she screamed, her voice raw. "Is this my life now? Dead men in my hallway being dragged from my home? This is your protection? This is what it feels like to be yours." "It's what it feels like to be alive," he shot back, his own control finally snapping. He stalked toward her, his fury a tangible thing. "You wanted your life? That's what it looks like. Lana, alone, jobless, and 2 minutes away from being a piece of leverage on a cold, wet pier. Is that what you want? I didn't ask for this." She shrieked, her hands balled into fists. She beat them against his chest, a useless, frantic drumming. He was solid, immovable. "I didn't ask for any of it. Not the alley, not the break-in. Not you. I didn't ask for you." The fight drained out of her, all at once. The adrenaline, the fear, the fury. It all evaporated, leaving her hollow. Her fists slowed, and she collapsed, her forehead resting against his chest. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. And this time it was not a war cry. It was a sob, a deep, racking sob of a woman who had simply run out of strength. He froze. Her tears, her absolute broken surrender, disarmed him in a way 100 gunmen never could. His arms, which had been rigid at his sides, came up, slowly. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He just held her. One large scarred hand went to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. The other wrapped around her waist, pulling her in. He held her tight, strong, and quiet. He said nothing, and he just absorbed her brokenness. He absorbed her sobs, his black shirt growing damp, and he just held her. He was a pillar. He was an anchor. She cried for her lost job, for her violated apartment, for the man in the alley, for the terror. She cried for her lost, hopeless life. After a long time, the sobs quieted. She was left trembling, her face pressed against the solid, warm wall of his chest. She could feel his heart, a slow, steady, powerful beat beneath her ear. He was still just holding her. She looked up, her face tear-stained, her eyes red. He was looking down at her, and his face was stripped bare. The coldness, the fury, the control, it was all gone. All that was left was a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrored her own. A deeply emotional, passionate scene unfolded. He didn't move. She did. She raised a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the faint stubble. He was real. This was real. "You came for me," she whispered. It was not an accusation. It was a revelation. "I will always come for you. Lana." His voice was a low, rough rasp. She rose on her tiptoes and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of submission. It was a kiss of desperation. It was a kiss that said, "I am lost, and you are the only thing that feels real." It was a kiss that tasted of salt and fear and a deep, undeniable need. His response was immediate. It was a groan, a sound of pure, unadulterated need that came from the depths of his chest. His hands tightened, one on her waist, one in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. He kissed her back, not as a boss, not as a killer, but as a starving man. His mouth was demanding, his lips hard and hot, and she met his desperation with her own. Her trembling hands clutched his shirt, pulling him down. This was not the slow, tender discovery in the garden. This was a fire. This was two people, broken and hunted, trying to piece each other back together with their hands, with their mouths. He kissed her jaw, her neck, the sensitive skin below her ear, his breath hot, his lips bruising. She was shaking, her knees weak, and she was clinging to him. Her body arched into his. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard, their chests rising and falling in unison. "Lana," he breathed. His eyes closed. She pulled back, just enough to look at him. Her eyes were wide, her lips swollen, her entire being trembling with an emotion she was too terrified to name. "Don't," she begged, her voice a small, broken whisper. "Don't do this. Don't make me feel safe. Don't make me want this. Don't make me feel safe if you're not staying." He looked at her, his dark gray eyes so intense they burned. He cupped her face, his calloused thumbs stroking her tear-stained cheeks. He made a quiet vow, a promise that was more sacred than any words he had ever spoken in his life. It was a vow made not by a boss, but by a man. "I would give up the empire," he said, his voice raw with a truth that shook him to his core. "I would burn it all to the ground, just to keep you alive." The vow hung in the air of the penthouse, a promise so profound it changed the very atoms in the room. "I would give up the empire to keep you alive." It was the confession of a king, and it had been torn from him by her brokenness. The adrenaline had faded, leaving them in a raw, quiet space where all the old rules were gone, replaced by a single, terrifying new one. They were in this together. Dominic was not a man who allowed loose ends. The attack on Lana's apartment, so precise, so timely, was not just La Furia, it was a betrayal. He stood in the war room, the door wide open. Lana was not in the living room. She was at the desk, sipping coffee, her eyes on the same map he was studying. The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer a prisoner of the safe house. She was its other resident. "They knew the building," Dominic said, his voice a low growl. He was on the phone with Sal, who was cleaning up the mess at Lana's building. "But they also knew when. They knew I wasn't there. They knew my men were in the car, not on the stairs. They waited for you to be alone, and they waited for me to be gone." He hung up, the silence in the room heavy. "Someone told them," Lana said. It was not a question. "Someone from my inner circle." He turned to the whiteboard, where he had a simple flowchart of his organization. "Only 3 people knew my exact movements yesterday. Sal, who was with me, Rico, who was coordinating my backup, and Reed." Lana looked at the name. "Reed, your consigliere." "My consigliere," Dominic said, the word tasting like acid. "My brother's consigliere. He advised me to cut you loose. He called you a liability. He said I was letting a ghost compromise the family." He slammed his fist on the desk, a rare break in his control. "Once, he didn't just leak your location. He was trying to solve his problem, get you killed, and prove to me I was weak." Lana stood up. The woman who had collapsed in tears in his arms was gone, replaced by someone cold and focused. "So what do we do about him?" Dominic was impressed. There was no fear, no pleading, just a shared objective. "We do nothing. Not yet. A king cannot accuse his most trusted advisor without proof, or the kingdom fractures. Reed thinks he's cleaning up my mess. La Furia thinks he's their key. We let them both believe it." "And what about me?" Lana asked. "I'm not a ghost. I'm not a liability. I'm the one they're using to break you. I'm tired of being a target. I want to be the one who shoots back." She walked to the wall of surveillance photos, the faces of La Furia's capos and soldiers. "I was a waitress for 7 years. You know what that means? I have a memory for faces. I know how to listen to 3 conversations at once. I know how to read a man the second he walks in the door, whether he's a big tipper, a cop, or a man who's about to hit his wife. You've got guns. I've got skills. Use me." He looked at her, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time, not as a broken bird, but as a hawk. Arturo Velez, the new head of La Furia. He's hosting a masquerade ball tonight, a legitimate charity gala for the city's elite. He wouldn't be stupid enough to show his hand there, Lana said. "No, but his lieutenants will be," Dominic replied, a slow, cold smile touching his lips. "They'll be drunk. They'll be arrogant. They'll be celebrating." Lana smiled back, a sharp, dangerous expression that matched his. "Then we're going to a party." The woman who entered the ballroom on Dominic's arm was not Lana, the waitress. She was a work of art. Dominic had provided a dress of deep emerald silk that clung to her in a way that was not revealing, but suggestive of a dangerous confidence. Her hair was swept up, and a simple black lace mask obscured her eyes, making her anonymous and alluring. Dominic was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his mask a simple, severe black domino. They were a portrait of power and mystery. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering gowns and black suits, a room full of the city's most powerful, all hiding behind polite, jeweled masks. La Furia was here, not in their street clothes, but in tailored tuxedos, trying to play at being legitimate. "Arturo Velez," Dominic murmured in her ear, his hand a warm, solid weight on the small of her back. "Host, by the bar. He's the one in the silver wolf mask." "And us?" she whispered back, the heat of his body, the scent of his cologne, a steadying presence. "We are a couple, impossibly in love, celebrating our new life. We are untouchable. You are not my liability. You are my prize." His words were a performance, but they sent a shiver through her. "Your target is on the balcony. Marco, Velez's nephew. He talks too much when he drinks, and he's always drinking." Dominic squeezed her waist. "Go, be brilliant." He released her, and she felt a momentary panic, a bird pushed from the nest. She walked through the crowd, a glass of champagne in her hand. She found Marco, a young, handsome man in an ill-fitting mask, already slurring his words to a bored socialite. Lana did what she did best. She waited. When the socialite left, she accidentally stumbled, her champagne sloshing onto his arm. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of breathless apology. She dabbed at his sleeve with a cocktail napkin, her touch light, impersonal. "Hey, no problem," Marco slurred, his eyes instantly locking onto her. "A beautiful woman can spill anything she wants on me." Lana laughed, a low, dismissive sound she'd practiced at the diner. "A beautiful woman? I'm just bored. My partner is obsessed with talking business." She gestured vaguely toward Dominic, who was now in a seemingly casual conversation with Velez. "That's the stone-cold Castellan, isn't it?" Marco sneered, trying to impress her. "Man's got a reputation, but not what he used to be." "Oh?" Lana said, her voice a perfect blend of innocence and intrigue. She leaned on the railing, her back to the party, her posture inviting confidence. "Yeah, my uncle, Arturo?" He puffed out his chest. "He's running circles around him, got a man so high up in Castellan's crew. He knows what Dominic eats for breakfast. Castellan thinks he's a king. He's just a puppet. My uncle's about to cut his strings." Lana's blood ran cold, but she kept her smile in place. "Sounds stressful. I thought this life was supposed to be glamorous." "It is," Marco bragged. "When you're on the winning side, Velez is calling a meeting in a day or two, going to squeeze Castellan for his entire shipping operation. And if he doesn't play, poof. He's going to take out his men, one by one, until he's left with nothing." Across the room, Dominic's conversation with Velez was just as coded. "Dominic, a surprise," Velez said, his smile not reaching the cold eyes behind his wolf mask. "I didn't think you had the stomach for parties anymore. I heard you were distracted. Arturo, you're confusing distracted With focused, Dominic replied, his voice a calm, level baritone. I'm simply pruning my garden, cutting out the rot. It's amazing what you find when you dig. Velez's smile faltered, just for a second. Be careful. Dominic, sometimes you dig so deep, you hit a sewer line, and the smell, it sticks to you. I appreciate the advice. Dominic raised his glass in a mock toast and turned, walking back to Lana, who was just extricating herself from Marco. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her from the balcony. We're leaving. They did not go back to the penthouse. They went to a high-end anonymous hotel suite, one Dominic kept under a false name. The adrenaline of the gala faded as the elevator doors closed, leaving them alone in the suite. Lana kicked off her heels, her feet aching. Dominic locked the door, and for the first time, she saw the tension in his shoulders. He was carrying the weight of a betrayal that was aimed at his heart. She walked up behind him and, hesitantly, put her hands on his shoulders, beginning to massage the tight, knotted muscles. He did not move at first, then he let out a long, slow breath, his head dropping forward. He confirmed it, she said quietly. Marco, he said Velez has a man high up, that a meeting is coming, that they're going to squeeze you for your shipping lanes. And Reed is the only one who has access to those books, Dominic said, his voice a low, tired growl. He turned, his hands finding her waist. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You were perfect tonight. You were brave. You were terrifying. I was a waitress, she whispered against his chest, her arms wrapping around him. You were my queen. This was the interlude. Not the frenetic, desperate passion of the safe house, but something slower, deeper. This was a romantic interlude built on shared fears and unspoken promises. He unzipped her dress, his fingers tracing the line of her spine, his touch a slow, electric burn. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to unbutton his shirt, to feel the solid, warm skin over his heart. They said nothing. The city lights glittered outside, but in the suite, there was only the sound of their breathing. He kissed her, and it was not a kiss of possession, but of grounding. It was a promise that, in this room, for this one night, they were not a boss and a witness. They were just a man and a woman who had found each other in the crossfire. His lips were warm, his touch was slow, his hands mapping her body with a tenderness that made her ache. This was not about sex. This was about sealing a vow. He was making good on his promise. He was not just protecting her life, he was joining it. Every touch, every slow, deep kiss was a word in a new language they were both learning. It was a promise of loyalty in a world full of betrayal. The sun was just beginning to streak the sky in shades of gray and lavender. Lana woke first, tangled in the soft, high-count thread sheets, her body warm, her mind, for the first time in her life, quiet. Dominic was asleep beside her, a rare, vulnerable sight. She slipped out of bed, pulling on one of his expensive white hotel robes. She walked to the door, intending to order coffee, and saw it, a thick, cream-colored envelope, slipped under the door. Her heart stopped. This was a secure suite. No one knew they were here. She picked it up. Her name was not on it. She opened the seal. Inside was a single, grainy photograph, taken on a bleak, gray day. It was a tombstone. A simple, granite slab. She read the name, Elena Rostova, beloved mother. Lana's legs went weak. It was her mother's grave in a tiny, forgotten cemetery in rural Ohio. On the back of the photo, a single line was scrawled in black ink. We know who she was. We know who you are. The coffee cup she had been reaching for fell from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Dominic was awake instantly, out of the bed, his gun in his hand before the pieces had even stopped scattering. He saw her, white as a sheet, clutching the photo. He crossed the room, took the picture from her shaking hand, and his face turned to stone. Dominic, she whispered, her voice a reedy, terrified sound. How? How do they know about her? She has nothing to do with this. She was a waitress. She died. It was a car crash. Dominic looked at the photo, and then at her, his eyes full of a bleakness she had never seen. No, Lana, he said, his voice heavy with a truth he had clearly hoped to bury. It wasn't a car crash. He took a deep breath. Your mother, Elena, she was not just a waitress. Before she met your stepfather, before she ran to Ohio, she was part of this. My father was the boss then. Her father was his bookkeeper. She grew up in the life, just as I did. Lana was shaking her head, a silent, desperate no. She saw what this world does to people. Dominic continued, his voice low, pained. She wanted out. She tried to leave, to run, to start a new life, and for that, she was killed. You mean, it was made to look like an accident, but it was an execution, a warning to anyone else who thought they could just walk away. The past is deeper than you imagined. Lana, La Furia didn't just find you. They know you. You are not just my weakness. You are Elena Rostova's daughter. You are a loose end, just as she was. The past she had been running from, the mother she had barely known, it was all a lie, wrapped in the same dark, bloody world he inhabited. Before she could even process the horror, the hotel phone rang, a shrill, piercing sound. Dominic picked it up, putting it on speaker. A voice, electronically disguised but smug, filled the room. Castellan, Arturo Velez, I hope you and Elena's girl enjoyed the party. I have a new party, and 3 of your men are the guests of honor. They're at Pier 12. They're very cold. Dominic, and very scared. Surrender the girl, or I will send them back to you. 1 piece at a time. The line went dead. Dominic was already moving. He was not a lover, not a man. He was a boss, and he was cornered. He went to the closet, pulled out a duffel bag, and began throwing cash, 2 passports, and a set of keys into it. We're done, he said, his voice a flat, dead thing. The empire is over. I'm making a call. I'm trading my shipping lanes for the lives of my men, and then I am getting you out of this city. We will vanish. I promised I would keep you alive. I'm keeping that promise. He was dismantling his own operation. He was giving up, just as he had vowed he would. He was choosing her, and in doing so, he was losing everything he had ever known. Lana stood by the window, the photo of her mother's grave clutched in her hand. Her mother had run. She had hidden, and they had still found her. They had killed her. The cycle of helplessness. It ended here. She turned. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were steady. She walked to Dominic, who was on the phone, barking orders to begin the transfer. She put her hand on his, forcing him to hang up. He looked at her, confused. Lana, we have to move. No, she said, her voice clear and cold. We don't. My mother ran, and for that, she died in a ditch, and I grew up with a man who hated me. I'm done running. She took the fake passport from his hand and tossed it onto the bed. This isn't just about you saving me. This is about me taking back my life. My mother's life. They want a meeting? They want Elena's girl? Fine, we'll go. But we are not surrendering. We are not running. I'm not your liability. Dominic, I am not a ghost. I'm standing beside you now, and we are going to end this. We are going to burn them to the ground. Lana's words. I'm standing beside you now. Were not a plea. They were a vow. They settled in the quiet hotel suite, and in that moment, Dominic Castellan's entire world shifted. The plan to run, to dismantle his empire in a panicked retreat, evaporated. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the steel in her spine, the photo of her murdered mother still clutched in her hand, and he saw not a victim, but an heiress. She had inherited her mother's fight, and he would not let her lose it. All right, he said, his voice a low, cold rumble. The boss was back. We don't run. We set the trap. He moved with a sudden, lethal grace. The duffel bag of cash and passports was kicked aside. He went to the desk, pulling out a new, clean burner phone. Velez wants a meeting at Pier 12, he said, his mind working, the pieces clicking into place. He thinks he's in control. He thinks Reed is his ace. He doesn't know that Reed is my bait. Reed, Lana said, the name tasting like poison. He'll be expecting your call. He'll be expecting you to be desperate, broken. And I will be, Dominic said. He dialed a number. He's been advising me for weeks to cut you loose, to trade you to Velez as a peace offering. He'll be waiting for me to finally take his advice. The phone rang. Lana put her hand on his. "Wait." She hit the record function on the burner phone. "Let him confess." Dominic's eyes met hers, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. He nodded. "Read." Dominic's voice was a masterpiece of desperation. He sounded broken, tired, beaten. "It's done. Velez has 3 of my men. He's right. This is all because of the girl. I'm out. I'm taking your advice. I'm giving him the girl." Reed's voice on the other end was smooth, oily with false sympathy. "Dominic, it's the hardest choice, but it's the right one. For the family, you're doing the right thing. Velez will be reasonable once he has his leverage. Pier 12, he's waiting for you. Just hand her over. It will all be over then." "And the shipping lanes?" Dominic asked, playing his part. "He wants them. Just give him what he wants, Dominic," Reed soothed. "It's only business. We can rebuild. He just needs a win." "You're right," Dominic said, his voice hollow. "It's just business." He hung up. Lana saved the recording. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a file, complete and damning. "He's not just a mole," Lana whispered, her face pale. "He's a vulture. He was guiding you to your execution." "And now," Dominic said, holstering his weapon, "we're going to the execution." Pier 12 was a cathedral of rust and shadow. A single, massive warehouse sat at the end of the docks, the black, oily water of the bay slapping against the pylons. It smelled of dead fish and diesel. Dominic and Lana did not arrive as captor and prisoner. They walked in side by side, 2 sovereigns arriving for a negotiation. Lana was not bound. She wore a simple black coat, her face composed, her fear packed down deep, transformed into a cold, hard diamond. Inside, it was a trap, laid bare. Arturo Velez, the man in the silver wolf mask, was on a raised platform, flanked by at least a dozen men, all armed, all wearing the telltale black of La Furia. Dominic's 3 lieutenants were there, on their knees, hands bound, faces bruised, and standing next to Velez, smiling a thin, tight smile, was Reed. "Dominic," Velez boomed, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "You came, and you brought the little ghost, Elena's girl, a wise decision. Reed, you were right. He has gone soft." Reed stepped forward, his face a mask of smug pity. "It's over, Dominic. The family needs a strong leader, a man who sees with his head, not elsewhere. I'm afraid your time is done." Dominic ignored him. He looked at Velez. "You wanted the girl. Here she is. You wanted my men. They're here. Let them go, and we can discuss the shipping lanes." Velez laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Discuss? There is no discussion. Reed has already given me the access codes. This isn't a negotiation. This is a surrender. You will hand her over. You will walk away. And if I'm feeling generous, I'll let you live, a king with no kingdom." "That's a tempting offer," Dominic said, his voice calm, conversational. He took a step forward into the center of the warehouse. "Lana," he said, not looking at her, "you were right. I am tired of this life." And then he shouted, his voice a raw command that shook the building. "It's a new deal." Lana didn't hesitate. She had her instructions. She bolted, not for the door, but for a pre-scouted stack of metal shipping containers, diving behind them just as the world exploded. The massive, rolling warehouse doors at the front and back of the building slammed open. It was not gunfire. It was light, blinding, high-intensity floodlights, and then the sound, not sirens, the unmistakable, pounding whump, whump, whump of police tactical units, dozens of them, pouring in from both sides, clad in black, shouting. "Police, drop your weapons now," Velez screamed, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "It's a setup! Kill them! Kill Castellan!" Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from every direction, the sound deafening, a storm of lead and light. La Furia, caught between the police and their target, were completely overwhelmed. Lana huddled behind the container, her hands over her ears, her body trembling so hard she thought her bones would break. She was terrified. She was paralyzed, but she had to see. She peeked through a gap. She saw the police, efficient, brutal. Taking down Furia men, she saw Velez, his wolf mask knocked aside, firing blindly as he was tackled, and she saw Dominic. He was not fighting the police. He was not, she realized, fighting anyone. He was moving through the chaos with a singular, deadly purpose. His eyes fixed on one man, Reed. The consigliere had been played. He saw the police. He saw Velez in handcuffs, and he knew his life was over. He was a dead man. Unless... He saw Dominic approaching, not with a gun, but with the cold fury of a man who had been betrayed to his core. Reed pulled a knife. Not a gun. This was personal. "You!" Reed shrieked, his composure gone, replaced by a rat-like desperation. "You ruined me. You ruined everything for a waitress." He lunged. It was not a gunfight. It was a brawl. A brutal, one-on-one fight in the middle of a police raid. Reed was wild, fueled by a desperate, cornered rage, the knife a silver blur in his hand. Dominic was precise. He was a rock, taking the blows, moving inside the wild swings. Reed was faster than he looked. He got inside Dominic's guard, the knife flashing, slicing a deep, crimson gash along Dominic's forearm. Dominic grunted, a sound of pain and effort. He didn't retreat. He grabbed the wrist that held the knife, ignoring the blade, and used Reed's own momentum to twist. There was a sickening, wet snap. Reed screamed as the knife clattered to the floor. Dominic didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. He was not a boss in that moment. He was a brother, avenging a betrayal. His punch was not a wild swing. It was a precise, perfectly executed blow to the temple. Reed's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled, boneless, to the concrete. Dominic stood, breathing heavily, his arm bleeding freely, dripping onto the floor. He leaned against a pillar, the fight momentarily leaving him. The warehouse was almost quiet. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by the shouts of, "Clear!" and the sounds of men being zip-tied. A single Furia gunman, one who had hidden behind a forklift, saw his moment. He saw the wounded, exposed boss. He raised his pistol, taking slow, careful aim at Dominic's back. Lana saw it all. The gunman, the gun, the man she loved, bleeding, unaware. Before they left the hotel, Dominic had pressed a small, heavy pistol into her hand. "Only if you have no other choice. Lana, only if it's him or you." She was trembling. Her mother had run. She had died. Lana was done running. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a ghost. She was a survivor. She stepped out from behind the container. "Dominic!" He turned, his eyes widening as he saw the gunman. The gunman saw her. He swung the pistol toward her. Lana didn't think. She raised the gun, her hands shaking, her eyes locked on the threat. She squeezed the trigger. The sound was small, a sharp pop that was almost lost in the vast warehouse. The gunman looked surprised. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. He looked at Lana, a silent question in his eyes. Then he fell. The warehouse was silent. Every police officer, every criminal was staring at her. The woman who had just fired the last shot. The gun fell from her trembling hand, clattering on the floor. Dominic was at her side in an instant, his good arm wrapping around her, pulling her into his chest, shielding her from the stares, from what she had done. "You're okay," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. It's over. It's all over." A man in a trench coat, a police detective, walked over, his face grim. "Castellan, that was a hell of a party." Dominic didn't release Lana. He just reached into his coat pocket with his good hand and pulled out the burner phone. "The snake. Detective. Like I promised." He nodded at Reed, who was being hauled to his feet. "That's his confession. He's the mole who set up my men. He's been working with Velez for months." The detective took the phone. "And Velez?" "On that recording," Dominic said, his voice tired. "You'll find Velez bragging about every rival operation he plans to take over. All the names, all the dates, a gift. From me to you." The detective looked at Dominic, at the bleeding arm, at the woman he was shielding, at the empire of criminals he had just delivered. A risky deal. Castellan, immunity for information. "Not immunity," Dominic said, looking down at Lana. "A new deal. I'm done. I'm out. This cleans the slate, all of it." The detective nodded slowly. "A lot of rot. Pruned. Get him to a hospital and get them out of here." Days later, Dominic sat in the penthouse, His arm was in a sling. The glass walls, once a symbol of his power, now just felt like a cage he was leaving. Rico, his most loyal lieutenant, the one he had saved from the warehouse, stood before him. "The syndicate is yours." "Rico," Dominic said, his voice final. "The rules are new. You run it clean. No civilians, no collateral, no ghosts. You build what I couldn't. You earn your peace." Rico looked at the man who had saved his life, who had given up an empire. He didn't shake his hand, he just bowed his head. "I will, boss. Godspeed." The city disappeared in the rearview mirror, its glittering, toxic skyline fading into a gray smudge. Lana sat in the passenger seat of the Audi, not the one from the ambush, but a new one. She didn't look back. They drove for 2 days. They ended up in a small coastal town where the air smelled of salt and pine. A town where no one knew the name Castellan. A town where the loudest sound was the cry of gulls. They opened a small cafe, the New Deal. It was warm. It smelled of fresh coffee and baking bread. It was a small, simple, honest life, built with their own hands. One rainy afternoon, months later, the cafe was empty. Lana was wiping down the polished wood counter. Dominic was at a back table, doing the books, a small, silver-framed pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. The scar over his eye was the only hint of the man he had been. She looked at him, at the quiet, domestic peace, at the life she had never believed she could have. She walked over and leaned across the counter, her voice a soft, intimate whisper. "Love wasn't part of the deal, but I lied." Dominic looked up from his ledger. He took her hand, the one that was holding the dish rag. He turned it over and pressed a slow, warm kiss into her palm. He smiled. A real, quiet smile. A smile she had earned. "I knew you did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Lana and Dominic. Where are you listening from? We would love to hear from you. So please drop a comment in English and let us know your thoughts on the story. And if you love tales of grit, passion, and redemption, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more.